"Watch yourself," he warns, picking up a large firestone out of its stone bowl. I draw back, flinching as he drops the stone into the cauldron with a hiss. He adds another, and then a third. 3 stones? Why would he need to heat this that much? With 3 stones, the water will boil away in less than an hour. As steam begins to rise from the surface, I glance over at him. "What should I do now?" I ask. He gestures to the cauldron. "Keep stirring it, and if the level falls below 2/3, carefully add more seawater." I frown slightly, looking back at the bubbling liquid as I dip the spoon into it. I know what he's doing, I think. As the water boils, it turns to steam, but the salt is left behind. If we keep adding more salt water, it'll just get more and more salty until... "Bath salts," Sectarian says, and I jerk my head up. He gives me a faint smile. "You looked like you were trying to figure out what we're making. Herbal bath salts." "Oh, yes. Thank you, my lord. I had almost worked it out, too." He drags the 2 wooden stools out from under the table and pushes one over to me. "Have a seat, Lark. This takes hours. Let me know when you get tired and we'll trade." "Yes, my lord," I say with a nod, but I'll be Chain's lover before I tell him I'm too tired to work. He starts to walk past me, but then stops, reaches out, and catches my chin. I tense, fighting not to pull away from him, and slowly raise my eyes to his face. "I mean it, Lark," he says. "I'll never ask you to do anything I'm not willing to do myself." He releases me, and I nod again, my heart pounding as I look back down into the cauldron. How can he be so generous in what he says, and still so frightening in what he does? That was from this book, Magebound by Katica Locke. And this was my read for week 3 of Amour, created by the Bookish Bryants and co-hosted by many other people, including myself. This week the theme was haves or have-nots, which is sort of self-explanatory. Romance stories having to do with people who are privileged and people who are not so privileged. This is sort of a bit of both. I stumbled across this completely by accident because my friend Nakia over at Plot Twist bought this from Thrift Books because she stumbled across it randomly. And she couldn't really get on with the writing style because it's in present tense, and that's a style that's difficult for her, so I said, hey, I'll take it off your hands. Amour seemed to be the perfect opportunity to read this, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. So this is a very short fantasy story about this slave named Lark who's been beaten and abused his whole life. He's been through horrible things. He's covered in scars. Life has put him through the ringer, and one day he gets purchased by this mysterious man named Navin Sectarian, who is the lord of this great castle, and also a very, very powerful mage. He's the resident mage for the town that he lives in. Sectarian purchases him to basically serve as his assistant, which essentially means helping him make magical items, brewing potions, that kind of thing. And Lark then works in the shop below at the foot of the castle where people come and buy magical items. And of course, as you would expect, things get very erotic pretty quickly. Yeah, I'd never heard of this book. I'd never heard of this author. This was self-published in 2009. It was just a totally random find, and it was surprisingly enjoyable. The main thing that struck me about it was how imaginative it is. It has kind of this interesting vibe of like medieval fantasy, but then there's like sort of hints of he mentions going off-world, and I think he alludes to like ships and things like that. So there's a little bit of like sort of a sci-fi angle going on, possibly. And a good portion of the book, which you heard a little bit of in the section I read there, is just Lark learning kind of the ins and outs of running this business, of working as a mage's assistant. And that was actually pretty interesting. It goes pretty heavily into like the different ingredients that he uses, how he uses them, how they tally up figures. You just kind of get a sense of like the daily life of this castle and of kind of living in it and working in it. And I really liked that. I thought that was really interesting. It was really well done. And as I said, it was very imaginative. A lot of sort of magical stuff happens without explanation, as it should. The sort of assistant to, he's not really an assistant himself, but he's this little fox cat looking thing named Shaff. He's kind of like the store pet, you know. He's always like lounging around on the counter and stuff, and he talks, and he's always playing practical jokes on Lark. He's always kind of like fucking with him and ribbing him and stuff. He was probably my favorite character in the book. He's just super sarcastic and just aloof about everything. He feels very like fox cat-like, you know, very aloof, very sarcastic, very kind of just easy come, easy go type of person. But he also has like a sweeter side to him. He does help Lark to figure stuff out. Not without a lot of difficulty, of course, but he does help out, and he's just a really mysterious, interesting character. And there's a little bit more revealed about him at the end, which I won't spoil, that definitely further intrigued me to know more about him. As I mentioned, a sort of good chunk of the book is just kind of Lark learning to live and work in this place, and kind of getting used to the weird things that happen and the weird people that come in and out, because obviously a mage is going to have lots of magical or sort of supernatural connections. And so there's stuff like there's this giant talking spider that comes in who calls himself Araka, and he's a spider smith. He's a spider who smiths like swords and jewelry and things like that, and he does some dealings with Sectarian. There's a really, really cool scene where they have to go to this forest to capture this salamander, because it's been sort of unleashed and it's setting all the nearby forestry on fire. The mage that they end up doing this as a favor for is this sort of like forest mage who's like this really handsome guy with like long flowing hair, and he's got like this outfit made of leaves that like just barely covers his body, and they have this really kind of like contentious relationship that's really interesting. And the whole scene where they catch the salamander is really, really interesting. There's a lot of logistics, because it burns so hot that you can't even like approach it, so they have to wear this like magical salve, they have to wear like special goggles, they have to really like plan out how they're going to capture this thing, and that was all of that stuff was really, really interesting. I really liked that. It kind of has like a Howl's Moving Castle vibe, with this like beautiful, mysterious sorcerer and this like young, sort of downtrodden man who's like working for him, and all this magical stuff is going on around that's not really explained. It's just kind of part of the landscape. I really, really liked that. I wouldn't be surprised if Katica Locke was inspired by Howl's Moving Castle, because Sectarian definitely has a Howl vibe. He's got like long, beautiful hair. There's this one scene where Sectarian comes out, and he's had black hair up to this point, and he comes out and he's got like this almost like platinum blonde hair, and Lark points it out. He's like, "Your hair," and Sectarian just shrugs and says, I was getting bored of black. I was in the mood for blonde, and that felt very Howl to me. So yeah, it definitely has that kind of vibe, and I really liked that about it. And then on top of that, the romance itself is pretty good too. It's fairly generic as far as romances go, in the sense of like you can kind of see where it's going. It's very much like unrequited lust kind of thing, starting out kind of fearful of your master, and then gradually learning to sort of have more affection for him. Sectarian kind of plays your typical role of like seeming sort of big and scary at first, and then he gradually opens up more, and we learn more about him. But I'm not complaining about any of that. It was all really well executed, especially with this sort of bewitching magic that sort of ends up affecting Lark, that basically whenever magic is used around him, it kind of like infests him in a way, and that sort of manifests itself as like really like intense lust. And so there's a big sort of thing in the book about how like he's not sure whether or not the feelings that he's feeling for Sectarian are real, or if he's just been like bewitched, if it has something to do with the magic. That was all really good, and there is a little bit of dirtiness here, not a whole lot. It's not full on explicit, but there is some dirty stuff, and that was pretty sexy. I liked that. It was very tense and very fraught with like emotion and lust, and there's this sense of like Lark and Sectarian just kind of barely holding back from each other. That was all really well done. The main thing that sort of disappointed me about the book was, one, its length. It's very, very short. It's only 182 pages. I really would have liked to have seen the world expanded on more. I would have liked to have had more of a slow development of Lark and Sectarian's relationship. And there's also a lot of stuff going on too, like not only with him learning how to run the shop, there's Shaft. He ends up getting this pet that's like this weird sort of like lizard rock creature. There's all the mysterious stuff going on with Sectarian, where like you get the sense that he has like some dark secrets that we don't know about yet. There's this evil lord that everybody in the castle hates, and they kind of end up having a spat. There's just a lot going on, and it's all really interesting and pretty well done, and I wasn't bored at all throughout the book, but I just wish the author took a little bit more time to develop it and just expanded it more. I mean, this could have been like a 300-page book, 350-page novel. And then the other thing that kind of disappointed me about it was that I thought a lot of the conflict in the book was a little bit manufactured. Not necessarily the conflict itself. Like, as I said, a big part of the book is Lark sort of wondering if he's been bewitched, if the feelings that he feels for this mage are real. That was all fine. I had sort of mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, I felt like it was one of those like romance plots that I hate, where it was like just talk to each other, like this could have been resolved so easily if everyone was just like open and honest. But at the same time, like she kind of works that into the plot a little bit about their, how they're not talking to each other, and Shaft is kind of like trying to get them to talk to each other. So there is like that sort of aspect of it where it's sort of like self-aware, but then it also kind of like doubles back on itself. There's this like sense of like one step forward, two steps back. I felt like she was kind of like forcing them into this position that she needed them to be in for the second book, rather than kind of just letting them get to this place naturally and then exploring that in the second book, if that makes sense. There is a second book, as I mentioned. I think it's Kindle only, and unfortunately I looked into Katica Locke, and it doesn't seem that she's published anything since that book. That was in 2015, and I found a blog post from her in 2016 where she mentioned having some life and school issues. So unfortunately, I don't know if we'll ever see another volume of this series, but this was a pleasant surprise. This was very enjoyable. And Katica, if you're out there, if you somehow find this video, I just want you to know that I thought you wrote a wonderful book. I think you have a very fertile imagination, and I would definitely like to see more of what goes on in this world, especially at the end when she reveals a few things about Shaft and some other stuff that I won't spoil. But yeah, like this was just a really fun, solid, sexy kind of fantasy adventure romp, shades of like Howl's Moving Castle. It was just really enjoyable, and I'm glad I read it. So yeah, this was my that was Magebound. That was my read for week 3 of Autumn Amour. Next week, which is the last week, is independently published or professionally published, and I went with independently published. I'm reading a very popular book, from what I can tell on TikTok, Saint by Sierra Simone. I'm already 50 pages into it, and I'm really enjoying it, so I'll talk more about that when I finish. Until then, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!